When I'm not forcing my friends and family to read my Gossip Girls fanfiction, I like to answer questions I get on YouTube comments. So let's have at it. How high do you have your guitar action? So if you don't know, what guitar action is basically how far it is, or how far the strings sit off of your fretboard, right? So high action would mean they sit high off the fretboard. Low action would mean they sit low. If you don't know the differences, low action is easier to play. It's easier to hold on or hold down and do different things with. You can kind of play maybe a little faster on low action, but the downside is it might be a little buzzier. So high action is harder to actually hold them down, but the advantages would be that it promotes your hands getting stronger, and also there's a little bit more resonance, and a lot of people say that it improves the tone. So for me personally, I kind of like my action medium to medium high on both acoustic and electric, but actually probably for electric it's probably more medium. I think it's a little more important on an acoustic guitar to try like a medium high action. An interesting story though, a friend of mine actually set up some guitars for Michelangelo Badio, and if you don't know who Badio is, he's kind of like the guitar player that exists at the intersection between crazy guitar skill and unintentional comedy. And he had his guitar set up with super, super low action. Like the strings were barely off of the frets. And if you were to play this electric guitar unplugged, it would just sound like a total buzzy mess. But when it's amplified, it's not as bad. So you can get away with low action on an electric guitar a little bit easier than you can with an acoustic guitar. But it's just something that you want to think about if you've never ever thought about it before. Like if maybe all of a sudden your guitar is playing like harder or something, like it's harder to hold chords down, or maybe it's buzzing too much, you might want to get your action adjusted or get your guitar set up, because over time your neck can bow. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So if your guitar isn't playing right, it's something to always be thinking of. But me personally, I kind of like medium to medium high action. What gauge acoustic strings do you prefer? Well, the strings I usually use are Elixir 12s, and I kind of like the phosphor bronze ones, but I go to the nano webs too. And if it's a very special occasion like Valentine's Day or something, I'll go with the clear tone reds. But I've tried, I think I started off on 13s because 13s were known as medium, which is kind of strange that 13s are medium, but you never really see like higher gauge, like string gauges other than medium, but I don't know, this is kind of weird. So yeah, 13s, and 13 means 0.13 is the thickness of the thinnest string, if you didn't know. So 13s are medium, 12s are light, 11s can be considered like custom light, and 10s are extra light for an acoustic guitar specifically. So I started on 13s. Eventually I just tried, I think I accidentally bought 12s once when I was starting out, and I just liked them better, and I just kind of kept it that way ever since. But I remember when I was teaching a lot and playing a lot, I kind of started noticing some kind of fatigue in my fretting hand. So I actually tried 11s once, and it really, I just didn't feel like it got a full enough sound for me. So I ended up just getting back to, I sucked it up, and I just went 12s, and I've been on 12s ever since. But if you've never tried a different gauge string, it's definitely something you should experiment with, because like I didn't really even know what I was missing until I accidentally put 12s on it, and I've been a big fan of 12s ever since. So if you've never even thought about what gauge strings you use, just really try something different next time. Although if you're too different, your guitar might not be set up for it, and then it could just become a total disaster. But it's something that you always want to be cognizant is how thick the strings you're using are. Who are your top 3 most underrated guitar players? The underrated question is kind of interesting because like the most underrated guitar player I would not have heard of, right? I think underrated is kind of, it definitely depends on the circles you hang out with. Like if all you hang out with are people who love John Mayer, then John Mayer couldn't possibly be underrated because that's all you're talking about. But I'm actually going to take this question and split it into 3 parts. Underrated in the traditional sense, in that just not enough people know about this person. Underrated in just like my own opinion, and also underrated for somebody or for a guitar player that everybody already knows is a legend anyways. So first of all, just a straight up underrated guitar player that not enough people know about, I would say Josh Martin from a band called Little Tybee. And this is a band I talked about a few weeks ago, but this guy's like an absolute assassin on guitar. He has a really unique playing style that's kind of, to me, a little reminiscent of Trey Anastasio from Phish, but in maybe kind of like a more accessible way, I suppose would be a good way to put it. So definitely check out Little Tybee because there's some awesome guitar stuff going on there. And really, it's a band that, even though they've been out for a while, they got a few really good albums out, hasn't really exploded in a big way yet. So definitely show that band some love and check out Josh Martin because he's an awesome player and he actually gives some lessons on his playing style on his YouTube page too. So check that out. My own personal opinion for someone who's underrated, even though he's pretty well known, has got to be Elliott Smith. I think Elliott Smith is, like, to me, the greatest acoustic guitar player I've ever heard and probably the most influential on my own playing. And I almost kind of feel like 80% of what I learned on guitar teaching myself was just from learning Elliott Smith songs. I kind of think he doesn't get a lot of love, or like the love he deserves from just the general guitar community, because he is kind of mostly acoustic based, and it kind of seems like acoustic guitar players don't get the same kind of shine as maybe like rock electric guitar players do for whatever reason. And also because he's not really like a lead playing guitar player. I think the genius of Elliott Smith is not just his technical ability, but also his compositional chops and kind of just his songwriting skills. And to me, that factors into a guitarist's, rateability anyways. So if you don't know Elliott Smith, definitely check him out. I don't even have to mention a specific thing because everything he's done is amazing in my opinion. Elliott Smith fans are like total fanboy geeks too, so there's definitely a lot of people that like Elliott Smith, so he's not totally unrelated in that regard, or underrated in that regard. But the third underrated guitarist I'm going to say is kind of a class because this guy's already a legend, but I don't think he's legendary enough, and that is Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. Now again, it's hard to be underrated when you're like number 25 on like the all-time 100 guitarist list, but again, in my personal opinion, I feel like he's not held in the same regard as maybe some of his contemporaries. Like everybody, and when I say everybody, I kind of talk about newer generations that weren't around for his era. Like everybody knows who Jimmy Page is, Jimi Hendrix, Brian May, Pete Townsend, Keith Richards, and I kind of feel like just conversations I've had, Tony is in the next tier of people to get mentioned when I think he's possibly the most influential guitar player of the entire era as far as, just kind of like, the father of kind of modern metal, kind of a guy who really shred early on, but in a very melodic way that is incredibly creative, especially for a guy who's like missing like parts of his like fretting hand fingertips from like an accident he had when he was a teenager. So yeah, Tony Iommi is just an awesome player, and he doesn't get enough credit. And if you really kind of dig deep into some of the Sabbath catalog, you'll kind of tell really quickly this guy's just a riff master, a solo master. He's kind of like the complete package. And even though everybody knows who he is for the most part, I think in the grand scheme of things, he is an underrated guitar player. So for listening homework this week, we've got to go with something Sabbath, and I am picking the song Neon Nights. I think Neon Nights is probably one of my top favorite songs about legendary warriors being called to travel across a fiery lake as burning angels are trying to impede their path. But it's also kind of a guitar masterpiece as far as just riff after riff after riff after awesome solo. So check out Tony just shredding all over Neon Nights. And again, for all the Sabbath songs, like a lot of people don't even have this in like their top 10 Sabbath songs, and I think it's probably maybe some of the Dio stuff. I don't know, whatever. Neon Nights is awesome. I'm going to link you to a video and also a pretty much correct tab showing you how to play it. So give that a shot, and any questions or comments you have, leave them in the comments, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Thanks a lot.